Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
Well, it's a Thursday morning, but, brothers and sisters, doesn't it feel like a Friday? Because tomorrow is a 4th of July holiday. God bless America. Hope you're already having a good 4th of July weekend. Be safe out there. There are going to be a lot of people on the road, so pack your patience and your prayers. I always find that when you're driving, praying the rosary helps. It just gives you kind of like a peaceful, very peaceful feeling. So we have a great lineup for you as we wrap up a week of live programming. We will be with you tomorrow. We will have a special edition of Catholic Connection just for you. But today, as always, because it's a Thursday, we do have our very own Father Mitch Pacwa. And he's a type of priest. He's so knowledgeable, of course, on all things faith, Catholic, the Church, etc., etc., etc. But I could say, hey, Father Mitch, let's talk about the Founding Fathers. Let's talk about Catholics and the history of our country. Let's talk. Okay. And he is just phenomenal. So that's what he's going to do today for us. And then we're going to be checking in, and I'm very excited about this as well, because the Supreme Court handed us a huge pro-life victory. Katie Daniel is a legal director for the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America Group, and we are going to be talking about the recent Supreme Court ruling that states can ban Medicaid funding for abortions. We'll dive into that. And then in the second hour, we have a special treat for you. My friend Chuck Gaidica is coming back. Of course, he's a former NBC newscaster and weathercaster, and he's now a health and wellness expert. And we're going to be talking about having a healthy holiday, and not just food-wise. I mean, I know we may get worried because we're going to be surrounded by a lot of foodstuffs, and not all of it is healthy, but everything in moderation, as the Church teaches. But there are some things you can do also spiritually to help you your beautiful 4th of July holiday and beyond. So we'll discuss that a little bit later, and there's some other things we're going to talk about in the second hour as well on this feast of St. Thomas the Apostle. So that is the rundown, as we say in the biz, for a Thursday morning edition of Catholic Connection. Here's a weather forecast for you for across the country this holiday weekend. The National Weather Service is telling us this morning we have severe thunderstorms in the northeast and northern plains, and then we're going to have some critical fire weather out west. Scattered severe thunderstorms capable of damaging wind gusts and hail are forecast across the northeastern part of the country and also North Dakota today. Heavy to excessive rainfall also possible over eastern New Mexico into western Texas and over the western Florida peninsula. And critical fire weather conditions will persist today over parts of the interior Northwest and the Great Basin. And not sure, hoping that most of this will wrap up very soon so we all have a nice 4th of July weekend, but we'll see because there's still some weather patterns out there. So that's a look at weather, and that is a look at the forecast and a little bit of an update on the rundown for the show. As we say, we do have a lot of news to get through, so let's get started here on Thursday, July 3rd, the Feast of St. Thomas. It's 3 minutes past the hour here on EWTN. Well, the family of Brian Kohberger's victims reacting to yesterday's plea deal connected to the murder of 4 University of Idaho students back in 2022. A lawyer for the family of 21-year-old Madison Mogan reading a statement.
Thank you for all your dedicated, diligent, and tireless commitment to justice and the successful outcome reached today.
But some of the families are not happy at all with the plea deal that takes the death penalty off the table in exchange for life without parole. The father of victim Kaylee Goncalves says, "We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us." Speaker Mike Johnson is trying to win over Republican holdouts who have kept the big, beautiful bill from advancing in the House.
I have spoken to all of them, and at 3 of the 4. I'm trying to find the 4th one. But a couple of those are still waiting for some of those questions to be answered, and they're just sort of putting placeholders on the board, and I think they're open for conversation.
A procedural vote that would advance the bill has stalled with 4 Republicans voting no. The GOP can only afford to lose 3 votes. Johnson could be seen on the House floor yesterday having an animated discussion with Georgia's Andrew Clyde. The other Republican holdouts are Representatives Keith Self from Texas, Victoria Spartz from Indiana, and Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. The Vatican granting a parish in Texas an exemption from restrictions to the traditional Latin Mass imposed by Pope Francis. Catholic News Agency explains the exemption requested by the bishop in that part of Texas, San Angelo Diocese, earlier this year was granted to the parish of St. Margaret of Scotland in that area. Cardinal Raymond Burke, a champion of the traditional liturgy, has said he has asked the new Pope, Pope Leo, to remove measures restricting the celebration of the Latin Mass, stating at a conference in London recently, it's his hope that he will, as soon as it is reasonably possible, take up the study of this question. Catholic News Agency also telling us this morning no other such exemption by Pope Leo has been reported since the start of his pontificate. Pope Leo receiving Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, in private audiences on Wednesday morning in the Apostolic Palace. It was the first official meeting between the Prime Minister, who has just returned from Rome from the NATO summit on June 24th to 25, focusing on military spending, and the Pope, who on the same day was engaged in a full schedule of audiences. A Vatican statement saying that during the cordial talks held at the Secretariat of State, the good existing relations between the Holy See and Italy were highlighted, and the joint commitment to peace in Ukraine and the Middle East and humanitarian aid in Gaza were evoked. The conversation, they said, continued with a discussion on a number of questions pertaining to bilateral relations, as well as topics of interest to the Church and Italian societies. Mark Mayfield tells us President Trump says the U.S. has now struck a trade deal with Vietnam.
According to the president, the deal includes a 20% tariff on the Southeast Asian country's imports to the U.S. and will give the U.S. tariff-free access to Vietnam's markets. Vietnam has also agreed that goods would be hit with a 40% tariff rate if they originated in another country and were transferred to Vietnam for final shipment to the United States. The agreement was unveiled less than a week before a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is set to expire. I'm Mark Mayfield.
The Pentagon says U.S. strikes have knocked Iran's nuclear program back at least closer to 2 years. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell giving
all of the intelligence that we've seen have led us to believe that those facilities especially have been completely obliterated.
Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell gave the assessment yesterday. Last weekend, the International Atomic Energy Agency said, however, Iran could be enriching uranium in a matter of months. U.S. military has said 3 key nuclear sites were significantly damaged by more than a dozen bunker buster bombs and Tomahawk missiles. Sarah Lee Kessler tells us New York City's Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch says while there are no known or credible threats ahead of the Macy's July 4th fireworks show, police, though, are still very prepared.
Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch says there are no known or credible threats to this year's celebration. Still,
the NYPD and our federal partners are closely monitoring the threat from lone wolf actors who are motivated by world events.
New York City's top cop says drone detection teams will be in place for the fireworks show, as well as other robust counterterrorism measures.
Explosive detection canines, heavy weapons teams, harbor units conducting security inspections,
plus thousands of uniformed police officers at viewing locations across the city. I'm Sarah Lee Kessler.
Sean Diddy Combs is now being ordered to remain locked up until sentencing after being found guilty of transporting people for prostitution. He was found not guilty of the most serious charge against him, including racketeering and sex trafficking. He is expected to be sentenced on October 3rd, the judge ordering all sides to return to court on that date, but noted it could change if Combs' team argues to meet earlier than that date. The FAA now investigating after a wing flap broke off a Delta flight on its way to Raleigh, North Carolina. The flap was discovered around 8:30 yesterday morning in the driveway of a home there. Delta confirming that flap came from Delta Flight 3247, a Boeing 737 flying in from Atlanta. The flight landing safely, and there are no reports of injuries or property damage. Laura Westbrook tells us the search for survivors continuing after a ferry sank off the coast of the popular tourist island of Bali in Indonesia.
The boat was carrying 53 passengers and 12 crew members when it sank at 11:20 local time on Wednesday. It was on its way to Bali from Indonesia's main island of Java. A rescue team, inflatable rescue boats and a bigger vessel are being used in the search efforts. 4 of the known survivors reportedly saved themselves by using the ferry's lifeboat and were found in the water in the early hours of Thursday morning. The ferry operator told local media that the vessel had reported engine trouble shortly before it sank on a route that is often used by locals going between the islands of Java and Bali. Laura Westbrook, Hong Kong.
The Disney Dream was in international waters Sunday when a little girl fell from the 4th deck between the Bahamas and Florida. Broward Sheriff's Office spokeswoman Velda Coleman Wright says investigators are now reviewing videos and interviewing Disney personnel along with the girl and her father about what went wrong. And she also says there are some erroneous rumors going out all over social media.
One of the things that is upsetting to the family is some of the erroneous reports that you've seen on social media saying that the father was holding his daughter when she fell overboard, and that is not true.
And Coleman Wright also says this appears to be a freak accident and not anything suspicious. Dr. Phil's TV network, Merritt Street Media, is filing for bankruptcy. In addition to the Chapter 11 declaration, it's suing Christian TV companies Trinity Broadcasting and TCT Ministries for allegedly hurting its business and backing out of their obligations. The suit claims Trinity failed to provide agreed-upon national distribution and is seeking damages, plus the cost of legal fees. And Matt Madison tells us there are new brain implants that are now being prepared for commercial use.
Several firms are now set to take brain-computer interface from the experimental stage to commercial usage following more than 20 years of research. The technology decodes brain signals that control speech and movement, and early products will allow users to control a computer cursor or generate artificial speech. Tech billionaire Elon Musk's Neuralink is one of the most discussed devices in the BCI field, but the first product to reach the market could possibly come from competitors BlackRock and Neurotech. I'm Matt Mattinson.
And as far as the weather is concerned this weekend, well, a cold front is expected to spark storms in the eastern half of the U.S., causing headaches for all of those of you who are, well, traveling for the upcoming 4th of July holiday weekend.
It's a familiar theme for those taking flight. Record demands, meeting the wrath of Mother Nature. The TSA posting that 6 of the top 10 travel days all time have taken place in 2025. That includes 2 in the last week, topped by more than 3 million people on June 22nd.
Reporter Sam Brock explaining the Mid-Atlantic region has been hit with thunderstorms as heavy rains have led to flooding in Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And yesterday, storm conditions were seen along the coast of the Carolinas down to Georgia. The National Hurricane Center is watching an area off the southeast coast that may cause tropical downpours in Florida. On the 4th, storm conditions are forecast for tomorrow to remain in the southeast, while the Northeast and Midwest will have mostly favorable conditions for the holiday. And the 4th of July travel period is in full swing. AAA is predicting over 72 million will be venturing at least 50 miles from home over the Independence Day holiday period that started on June 28th and goes through July 6th. That's an additional 1.3 million road travelers compared to 2024. It also says 5.84 million will be flying to their destination. And by the way, that's also a new record. Speaking of the 4th of July, of course, the red, white, and blue, God bless America. Father Mitch Pacwa with our cultural connections, talking about the Catholic connection, pun intended, to the Declaration of Independence and more. That's coming up next on a Thursday. It's July 3rd. Happy 4th of July. We'll be right back here on EWTN. July 3rd, 2025 on a Thursday. Great to be with you and always great to catch up with the one, the only Father Mitch Pacwa for our cultural connections. And Father, great to have you on the program. And it's so powerful as we enter into this very important 4th of July weekend. And I think we've had a lot of really good examples of how well our system of government can work if we think of the decisions that came recently from the Supreme Court. There's some really good stories that happened where parents' rights were affirmed in terms of if they want to pull their children out of a classroom where they're being taught all kinds of things that are against their religion, they should be able to do so. That was a Maryland case. from the state of Tennessee being allowed to continue banning these mutilating surgeries on children. But we have this system of government that has a balance of check and powers and check and balances. I just wonder if people, how many of us sometimes maybe take that for granted. What are your thoughts as we enter into the 4th of July weekend?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a delight. A number of things. I've just been reading the history of the Roman Republic. I'm doing some work on that and for a future book. And it's amazing to read about the collapse of the Roman Republic. It just totally collapsed, and just like the philosopher Plato had said, and then in the 40s BC, the Roman lawyer and philosopher Cicero had said the same, that if you give completely free rein, you end up with people doing whatever they want and then causing chaos. And then when they cause chaos, the next thing people want is a dictator, just to end the chaos and the danger of the chaos. And we have been seeing how the kind of false attempts at free expression that has gone on for the last years with organized and well-paid groups like Antifa and others, that they bring a lot of chaos and the danger. And I think, in fact, one of the goals of the people financing them is that to cause chaos and then have a dictator where the people who think they know everything and know better than everyone will make all the decisions. The system of checks and balances is meant to prevent that from happening. There is a reality of human sin. People are sinners. They do a lot of wrong things, sometimes just because they're dumb, sometimes because they're just outright mean. And they harm other people. We recently saw this past weekend, a man sets a fire and calls for the firemen to come. They shoot him. This is chaos. And we want to see this kind of change in the way that we understand our politics and our balance of power to keep human sin in check, because we have people who are sinners in politics. It's always been there, and everybody in politics and everybody outside of politics are sinners. But we try to keep checks and balances on them. And we structure it in the government with having different branches of government with different authorities to check on each other and keep each one at bay. You can't have the judiciary go wild or the executive branch or the legislative branches. Each one has to keep within certain bounds so that they don't do things that harm the whole nation. And the brilliance of our early founders is that once they decided to set up a national government for all 13 states, that they did install these checks and balances, and they frankly learned a lot from the strengths and the mistakes made by the Roman Republic. They studied these histories and these ancient writings in their classes. They grew up learning Latin and reading Cicero and Livy and the other Roman writers about what happened with the collapse of the Roman Republic. And when they established our democratic republic, they didn't want to make the same mistakes, but tried to ensure that we would have balance. Could I add one other thing too? Along
Sure,
this
please
line?
do. Sure.
There's a very, very important line by George Washington, and similar thoughts were reflected by John Adams, namely that the Constitution of this country is very vague. There are not a lot of laws in the Constitution. And they both, and other thinkers as well, have said this. The system of government we have assumes a people who have a Christian morality. That's the basic assumption of people who is trained in a high level of morals will be able to keep our democratic republic. Because again, unlike the claims of some politicians, it is not a democracy. It's a republic, a democratic republic. And to keep it, we need a moral people. And they warned back in the 1780s and 90s that if we are not a moral people, then legislators will come up with more laws than we will even be able to know. They'll keep legislating each moral issue because the people don't have a morality that comes from their religious faith. This is another choice that we have to make. Do we want the government to enforce any kind of religious perspective and enforce a religion? No. The Constitution makes it clear. Congress shall not establish a religion nor prevent the practice thereof. That's not their realm to choose people's religion. But just because Congress is recognized as not having the authority or the wisdom to choose a religion for all the people, it doesn't mean that having a religion is optional. Religion and religious faith is the basis for moral action. And all the attempts at morality apart from religion tend to fall apart and become fairly cruel. That communism would be a classic example of a religionless moral system that became extraordinarily cruel and vicious. We want to make sure that we have a religious background to our government and our civil life.
We'll talk more about this with Father Mitch Pacwa, Thursday edition of Cultural Connections. Wishing you a beautiful 4th of July weekend, and never forget the freedoms of our country, the greatest country on earth, and the founding fathers in connection to that freedom. More with Father Mitch Pacwa when we come back on a Thursday, July 3rd. Hope your Thursday is going well. It's July 3rd, 2025, and it's Father Mitch Pacwa and our Cultural Connections. We're talking about freedom, in particular religious freedom, the Founding Fathers, as we move into this beautiful holiday weekend. Yes, we have a lot to celebrate, but it's not just baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet, if you're old enough to remember that commercial, and I am, and I know Father is, even though he's very young at heart. Remember that one, Father?
Yep,
baseball?
I do.
Yep, apple pie, hot dogs, and Chevrolet, whatever. Anyway, Really, really good discussion, Father. And to me, what is so amazing is that our country, United States of America, God bless America, the fact that the founding fathers, I know not every single one of them were Christian, but God had to be involved in this because otherwise, as you just so eloquently described in the previous segment, it would have imploded. But the way we have these checks and balances really do work, even though they're challenged quite often, and people want to change it and they want to make the country into something it's not. You know, Obama, when he went on his so-called America Apology Tour years ago, apologizing for the United States of America when it's done so much good around the world as well. But what do we know about the connection between faith and the founding fathers? And you did tell me during the break you wanted to share with our listeners a quote-unquote, pun intended, Catholic connection to the Declaration of Independence.
Yes. A couple things. There were some non-Christian members of the Constitutional Congress and of the Continental Congress before that. Thomas Jefferson was, fairly uncommitted to any Christian religion. He liked much more of what's called a deist approach. God created things and put it in motion. But he didn't, particularly like religions, and he had criticisms of them, typical of the 1700s. If you read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or especially Voltaire and David Hume, these were the people that Jefferson read. But he also read a book that was, underlying a lot of the phrases and ideas of the Declaration of Independence that he actually composed. He was not there for the Constitution. So he was the ambassador to France when they wrote the Constitution. But for the Declaration, he wrote it with some revision by the Continental Congress. And one of the sources he used was a debate between the official theologian of King James I, famous for the King James Bible, in the early 1600s. And his theologian was arguing in favor of the divine right of kings. God appoints kings. It's up to them and to do God's will, and their monarchy is God's will. Arguing against it, and this is what the parts of the debate that Jefferson quoted, was St. Robert Bellarmine of the Society of Jesus. St. Robert was a Jesuit and a cardinal who argued against the divine right of kings. Divine right of kings was not a Catholic principle, and that the kings were subject to God's law. And on the basis of the arguments that St. Robert wrote, Thomas Jefferson was able to show that when kings act unjustly, the people have the right to rebel against them. That was the phrases that he got from St. Robert Bellarmine, and there were some other lines in the Declaration of Independence that were borrowed from St. Robert Bellarmine. I think this is important as Catholics to understand that while there have been times when the papacy supported kings and monarchs, that's for sure, there is a Catholic principle underlying our Declaration of Independence and our notions that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are gifts from God the Creator. They are not given by the government, and they cannot be legitimately taken away by the government. This is one of the most important principles for us to remember and to protect, that the government does not give you your freedom. It is a servant of the freedom that God gives each individual and of the dignity God gives each individual. Now, was it perfect when they wrote this? No, it was not. They did not recognize the inherent God-given right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for Africans who have been brought in slavery. They should have ended slavery with the Declaration, but they also knew that they could not get the support of a number of the southern colonies for the new country and for the revolution if they opposed slavery. That was an evil compromise, to be sure, but it was something that would be legitimate, and eventually it would take that 77 years through the time of the Gettysburg Express, the Gettysburg Address, that this principle would come up and apply to African Americans under Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And I think for us to remember that the seeds of liberty from slavery and freedom for African slaves and other slaves was used by Lincoln in the Lincoln-Douglas debates to argue against slavery. And with much blood shed, that happened. Unfortunately, had to go that route. But those principles were there, and it was recognized that it comes from God. This is yet another reason that we need to keep our religion as a factor of our society. So, because it was religious people, for instance, who were the core of the abolitionists, and that we want to be there for the rights of the unborn, the sick and the elderly, poor, and other groups in our country, so that their right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness can be pursued not only by them, but by all of us supporting that principle.
Father, what can we do this weekend, this holiday weekend, 4th of July, which is such an important celebration for us as Americans? What can we do to honor our founding fathers, to honor the freedoms that we have? Well, we don't have time for that. We'll have to follow up with you next week. But I think you kind of gave us a...
Read the Declaration.
There you go.
A few minutes.
Absolutely.
And pray
Father,
for our country.
And pray for our country. And go to Mass on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
Father, thank you. Have a great weekend, 4th of July. God bless you. God bless America. We'll be right back on a Thursday. Minutes past the hour. Welcome back to Catholic Connection on July 3rd, 2025, moving into the 4th of July weekend. Technically, for many people, already there as they get ready to travel for the holiday. But don't forget to stay tuned to EWTN Radio and TV. For example, tonight on The World Over with Raymond Arroyo, we are going to be hearing from Todd Starnes, radio TV host and author, who's sharing his brand new book, a beautiful book, Star Spangled Blessings. How cool is that? Devotions for Patriots. Also, Yael Eckstein, president of the International Fellowship of Christian and Jews, talking about the relationship between Christians and Jews amid the unrest in both Israel and Gaza. And last but not least, in honor of Independence Day, the best of World Over interviews with two late great Americans, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore and U.S. Navy Commander Jeremiah Denton. All of that, plus my friend Raymond Arroyo. That's tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern on EWTN Radio and TV. Well, speaking of EWTN Radio, our next guest, I'm excited to have her back on. Katie Daniel is the legal director for the Susan B. Anthony List. And Katie, we've had a lot of pro-life victories, including a big one at the Supreme Court. Thanks for joining us this morning. So what's your reaction to what happened with the Medicaid funding for abortion in the state of South Carolina?
Well, we are thrilled that the Supreme Court got this case right. South Carolina, all the way back in 2018, said Planned Parenthood and other abortion businesses are not a good partner for our state Medicaid program, in large part because they don't meet the state's values, but also because they provide a very limited set of services. And so the state said, we're going to partner with organizations that provide wraparound, much more comprehensive health care. Of course, Planned Parenthood hates it when any government dollars get taken from them. They filed this lawsuit. They've been fighting in court now for 7 years. And finally, last week, the Supreme Court ended it and said that South Carolina and all of our other pro-life states have the ability to make this decision that abortion businesses are not good partners for the state.
So what does this mean in terms of the fallout for the pro-life movement, do you think, Katie?
Well, the first thing it means is that there's this slice of our taxpayer dollars that these abortion businesses cannot get. And we're really optimistic that Congress is going to finish the job. Here in the next few minutes, the House of Representatives is debating the One Big Beautiful Bill right now. And that would exclude abortion businesses like Planned Parenthood from Medicaid nationwide. So we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars of our taxpayer money that these abortion businesses won't be able to get.
We're talking with Katie Daniel, legal director for the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America Group. We're talking about a number of pro-life issues, including some recent decisions such as the Supreme Court and South Carolina and Medicaid-funded abortions. You brought up the Big Beautiful Bill. There's a mixed reaction in the pro-life community, of which I'm sure you're aware, regarding that, because pertaining to Planned Parenthood, there was, a year that they can defund them, and people were disappointed, although many are also saying that it is a big step. What do you think?
Well, of course, originally what Congress wanted to do was 10 years. That's the max that they can do under this type of legislation. Through all of the legislative process, the very strict rules that the Senate has, it ended up that the Senate bill has just 1 year. So, of course, when you think about billions of dollars versus hundreds of millions of dollars, we want to take every dollar away from the abortion industry. But I think it's important to remember that this is not the first time that Congress has tried to defund Planned Parenthood and big abortion. This started all the way back when Vice President Pence was a freshman congressman over 10 years ago. And so if we can get this to the president's desk, he's planning to sign it tomorrow, it will be the first time that we've successfully defunded Planned Parenthood in Congress nationwide.
Well, are you optimistic?
I am optimistic. I think, Speaker Mike Johnson has made this a huge priority for him. He said it at our SBA gala. He said, we're getting this across the finish line. We will defund Planned Parenthood. We've seen the White House come out in support of this. So, I'm just waiting like everybody else to see this final vote. But it sounds like they're going to sign the bill tomorrow, and the defunding starts immediately.
What do you think of the mood in the country right now? Even though there's a lot of division, it seems to be that there are a lot of wins for pro-lifers and also for people concerned about these issues that will be considered more conservative. There's a lot of decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, and it all works together. I mean, if we look at the issue in Tennessee where the Supreme Court upheld the ban on the mutilating surgeries for minors in terms of the whole transgender agenda. That is part of the whole pro-life discussion. Then we have this win, of course, with the Medicaid abortions in South Carolina. What do you think is happening? I mean, I know we have a good Supreme Court, but what I'm saying is, what do you think the mood is in the country as a result of that?
Well, I think there's a return to common sense. We know that most Americans, including people who say they're pro-choice, are very uncomfortable with abortions after the first trimester, after that first kind of 12-week mark. And so when the Democrats went for broke in November and they said, we are going to run the most pro-abortion candidate on the most pro-abortion platform, obviously the American people did not resonate with that. President Trump won, and he won the popular vote. So I think we are seeing this return to common sense, a return to the idea that the message that we want to help you support your family versus we're going to help you destroy your family, one of those is just so much more resonant with most people. And even most pro-choice people don't want to be funding these businesses with their tax dollars. So we've seen defunding to be very unifying in the Congress and also across the country.
So what other efforts, other cases are you following right now, Katie, as a legal director for the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America Group?
Well, certainly we're still seeing a lot of lawsuits around these ballot initiatives. So in states, like Michigan, in Missouri, we're seeing this ballot initiative gets passed, and in the campaign they say, oh, this is just a return to Roe, and then they immediately rush into court and try to undo all the laws that were allowed to continue during Roe, things like parental consent, like no taxpayer funding for abortion at the state level. And so we're seeing voters respond to that. I think, in Missouri, they just put a pro-life initiative to reverse their bad ballot initiative on for 2026. There's a group that's suing right now. All they do is send abortion drugs to kids through the mail using a phone app. They connect to kids on their phone, and then they send them abortion drugs. That's their business model. These guys are suing to get rid of parental consent. Voters are seeing that in the courts, and they're going to respond to it at the ballot box.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so out of control. I mean, there's a lot of, again, victories, but at the same time, when you said common sense, you start thinking about this. I mean, you can't even get your child any type of medicine without permission in a school. You can't take them to get their ears pierced, a tattoo, anything like that. I mean, you think of all the restrictions there are in terms of minors that are out there, whether you're in a school or let's say you want a child. If a child were to say, well, I just don't want to go to school anymore, or I just want to eat chocolate all day, or I just want to do this, that, or the other thing. If you do that as a parent, you could be arrested, right, for child abuse. And yet all these things for children, you just are out there and say, oh, no, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine. It a lack of common sense, total lack of common sense.
Yeah, I think we saw the Supreme Court start to reverse, as you mentioned. Some of these laws that were passed that were very common sense, that the left challenged, like the Tennessee law or the South Carolina law, and then some of these actions in blue states that go way too far. And parents are like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So that's something we want to make sure that people do understand, that we have a lot of work ahead of us to undo all the bad actions that were happening under Joe Biden, including allowing abortion drugs to be sent through the mail nationwide. There's a lot to celebrate, but we have big challenges ahead, too.
One of the challenges is in the state of Wisconsin, but we were chatting during the break, and you said it could have been a lot worse. Tell us about that.
That's right. So Wisconsin had a law that protected babies from conception. It had been on the books from 1849 all the way until 1973. So it stayed on the books all that time during Roe, those 5 decades. Wisconsin voters never appealed that law. In a lot of other states, the voters did. But in Wisconsin, they left it on the books. So as soon as the Dobbs decision came down 3 years ago, that law came back into effect because it was still on the books, and under Dobbs, it could take effect. And so there was a period of time where babies were protected throughout pregnancy in Wisconsin. There were several lawsuits filed. The one that was successful yesterday basically said, well, they've been regulating the issue, and they passed a 20-week law, so clearly they didn't mean for that old law to be in effect. Very questionable legal reasoning, but that's what the court went with. They said, you're right. Because they legislated what they could do during the Roe framework, they meant to repeal this old law that protects the babies, even though they never actually did it. So that's what the court accepted. They struck down the very protective law. They left all the other laws in place and said that this is an issue that the people can legislate. Planned Parenthood had filed another lawsuit where they were actually asking the Wisconsin Supreme Court to say there's a right to abortion in the state Supreme Court, basically a Wisconsin version of Roe v. Wade. That case, the court had heard arguments, but they declined to rule. They dismissed it. So when I say it could have been worse, we could have had the court say, not only are we striking down the protective law for the babies, but we're creating a right to abortion and basically forcing this on all the voters, until we can get it overturned by a future court or on the ballot. So, again, Planned Parenthood just going as far as they can to get as much as they can around the voters because they know the people of Wisconsin wouldn't put abortion on demand paid for by taxpayers through all 9 months into their law voluntarily. So they tried to do it through the courts.
You know, when you consider all the money they've been getting from taxpayers for decades, and they're just totally having a meltdown over this 1 year that's being proposed in the big beautiful bill on which they're voting right now in Congress. 1 year with all the money they take in elsewhere, and they're acting like it's the end of the world for them.
Well,
right?
What we know is that they've designed their business to be super reliant on government dollars. And anyone who runs a business, probably a lot of your listeners manage their own personal budget. They manage the budget at work. They understand that if you attach those government strings, that money could go away. Planned Parenthood doesn't seem to think that same logic should apply to them.
Of course not. So let me ask you, Katie, and as we wrap up, have about 2 minutes left. And looking at the case in Maryland, I know that doesn't pertain particularly to abortion. It's more of the transgender LGBTQ movement, but it really all ties in together in terms of the pro-life issues. I think that was a really good example of parents and people in the community paying attention, because in Maryland, officials came out and first said, we're going to tell you when the books are going to be presented, and we're going to allow you to opt out. Then all of a sudden they changed. And then the lawsuits came. And the first time they lost, and then the parents took it back, and they won, obviously, in the Supreme Court. But isn't this an example for us all to make sure we have to pay attention to what's going on, even at the local level, very local levels?
It absolutely is. And it was an example where they created the opt-out thinking, maybe some weird Catholic families, I say as a Catholic, are going to opt out, but most people won't. And then what they found was a lot of parents were opting out, because a lot of parents were not on board with their radical agenda. And so I think, there's a lesson in the power of us speaking up about the truth and about our values. And there are probably a lot more people who agree with us. We know the data shows there are, but we can find them in our real lives too, when we are willing to have courage and speak up for what we believe in.
For sure, because there were a number of different religious groups that were represented in that court battle. I mean, there were Catholics, there were Protestants, there were Muslims, there were Jews, and it really, I think, was an effort of what happens, as you said, when we stand up. Katie, thank you for your great work and for another great interview. Appreciate your well-informed discussion matters. And, of course, Katie is with the Susan B. Anthony List, Pro-Life America. They are the largest pro-life advocacy organization. We'll be right back on a Thursday. Wishing you a beautiful Thursday, July 3rd, 2025. Coming up in the second hour of Catholic Connection, my friend Chuck Gaidica is going to be joining us. He is a health and wellness expert and coach, and he is a former meteorologist, or he's still a meteorologist, but he's retired from the secular media. We work together side by side on many stories. Chuck and Vanessa and I go way back, and looking forward to catching up with Chuck. And he really is very much interested in health, and he'll tell us that journey. He's also a revert to the Catholic faith, recently featured on The Journey Home on EWTN. You can do an archive check on that one as well. And then for 2 cents, very excited to talk about St. Thomas the Apostle. It's his feast day today. And how many of you know that his relics are in Italy? That's right. We'll tell you where. It's along the Adriatic, a beautiful church. And we'll talk about that, as well as going over this beautiful page that EWTN sends out from the Mission Advancement Team. It is so cool. It is so nice and concise in terms of some reflection questions and a summary about the saint or the particular feast day. And I love these little nuggets that they send us via email. And you can just sign up for that on your own. So it's a lot of fun. So again, coming up, 2 cents, taking a look at St. Thomas the Apostle and also where his relics are in Italy. And then Chuck Gaidica walking us into the beautiful holiday weekend and how to keep, balance and still have fun in our lives, because the church is all about balance and moderation. So that's what's coming up in the second hour. We hope you stay tuned. Thanks so much for listening to EWTN on this 4th of July holiday weekend. Technically, which is already starting, but officially 4th of July isn't until tomorrow. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tamio.
Thank you for tuning in to the second hour of Catholic Connection here on EWTN's Radio Extra channel. Great to be with you on a Thursday as you and all of us head into the holiday weekend for 4th of July. Many of you are already into that mode, traveling. Maybe you're on your way to the airport or in the car already, maybe heading to a lake or to a cottage or to a nice vacay or vacanze, as we say in Italy. We are actually going to be having a fun 4th of July here in Bella Italia with friends of ours in our little village. They're going to come over and we're making burgers and fries and hot dogs and just going to have a great time and really enjoy it. And it's interesting because I was telling my producer Richard that Dominic and I yesterday went looking for 4th of July decorations. Now we are in a very small area in Umbria. We're between Assisi and Todi. We're about 35 minutes southwest of Assisi. And I said to Dominic, we knew we were going to be here for 4th of July. We took everything, including the kitchen sink, over, because when you have a home here, you need to constantly kind of replenish things and whatnot. Why didn't we bring some red, white, and blue streamers or something and throw them in the suitcase? So we were very creative, though, and we did find some balloons in the dollar store here, different colors, but they did have red, white, and blue. And we found some stars in the crafts section, red stars, so we got those. And then I went online and I printed up different images from online that we're just going to kind of place along the kitchen and the living room just kind of to get the effect. So maybe I'll take some pictures and post them on Facebook for you. But speaking of Facebook, there's some really great stuff on my page, including some updates on our Italy experience, especially the sunflowers. They're crazy. They're so pretty here. And a very special trip that Corporate Travel is doing with Dr. Liz Lev and her husband, Thomas Williams, in southern Italy. We did a video with them. It's there for you, along with the video that I did with Father Chaz from the Diocese of Lansing. And both Liz and I are opening up our homes and doing mini events and mini retreats. So if you want more information about that, you can go to travelitalyexpert.com, ctscentral.net. And of course, you can just check out all the great information on Facebook. It's kind of fun that I'll be posting more stuff this weekend. Coming up in the show today, we are going to talk about the feast day at St. Thomas the Apostle. And I'm also going to share with you, in addition to sharing some of the great information that is on the EWTN Mission Advancement email that they sent out this morning, which is awesome. I'm also going to introduce you to a church in Italy, which is named after St. Thomas, and where you can venerate his relics. Beautiful tomb there, so we'll talk about that. And then very excited to wrap up a Thursday edition of Catholic Connection with my friend Chuck Gaidica from Motor City, Michigan, the Motown area. He is a retired meteorologist from the NBC affiliate, also a journalist, and has been in the media for a very long time, and he has a specialty now in health and wellness. He's a health and wellness coach. And he also is a very dear friend. And we're going to talk about being healthy over the holidays, as in 4th of July, and learning really to slow down. As we say in Italy, il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. That is our second hour for the program. Let's see what the weather looks like if you're heading out the door. Well, the National Weather Service says scattered severe thunderstorms capable of damaging wind gusts and hail forecast across the Northeast and North Dakota today. Heavy to excessive rainfall is possible over eastern New Mexico into western Texas, over the western Florida Peninsula, and critical fire weather conditions will persist today over parts of the interior Northwest and the Great Basin as well. So that's a little summary for you of the weather, just to keep you posted if you're heading out the door. Right now, 4 minutes past the hour, you're listening to Catholic Connection, the second hour on EWTN's Radio Extra. Let's check the news now on EWTN. Well, the family of Brian Kohberger's victims reacting to yesterday's plea deal connected to the murder of 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. A lawyer for the family of 21-year-old Madison Mogan reading a statement.
Thank you for all your dedicated, diligent, and tireless commitment to justice and the successful outcome reached today.
But some of the families are not happy with Kohberger's plea deal that takes the death penalty off the table in the exchange for life without parole. The father of victim Kaylee Concalves said, "We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us." Speaker Mike Johnson is trying to win over Republican holdouts. They're voting on it right now, who have kept the big, beautiful bill from advancing in the House.
I have spoken to all of them, and well, at 3 of the 4. I'm trying to find the 4th one. But a couple of those are still waiting for some of those questions to be answered, and they're just sort of putting placeholders on the board, and I think they're open for conversation.
A procedural vote that would advance a bill has stalled with 4 Republicans voting no. The GOP can only afford to lose 3 votes. Johnson could be seen on the House floor having an animated discussion yesterday with Georgia's Andrew Clyde. The other Republican holdouts are Representatives Keith Sell from Texas, Victoria Spartz from Indiana, and Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. The Vatican has granted a parish in Texas an exemption from restrictions to the traditional Latin Mass imposed by Pope Francis. The exemption requested by the bishop earlier this year was granted to St. Margaret's of Scotland in the Diocese of San Angelo, Texas. Cardinal Raymond Burke, a champion of the traditional liturgy, has said he asked Pope Leo to remove measures restricting the celebration of the Latin Mass, stating that at a conference in London recently, "It is my hope that he will do this as soon as it's reasonably possible and can take up study of the question." No such exemption by Pope Leo XIII. No other exception has been reported since the start of his pontificate in May. And Pope Leo receiving Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, in private audience yesterday morning at the Apostolic Palace. It was the first official meeting between the Prime Minister, who has just returned from Rome from the NATO summit and focused on military spending, and the Pope, who on the same day was also engaged in a full schedule of audiences. A Vatican statement saying that during the cordial talks held at the Secretariat of State, the good existing relations between the Holy See and Italy were highlighted, and the joint commitment to peace in Ukraine and the Middle East and humanitarian aid in Gaza were also evoked. The Vatican went on to say the conversation continued with a discussion on a number of questions pertaining to bilateral relations as well as topics of interest for the Church and Italian society. Mark Mayfield tells us President Trump says the U.S. has struck a trade deal with Vietnam.
According to the president, the deal includes a 20% tariff on the Southeast Asian country's imports to the U.S. and will give the U.S. tariff-free access to Vietnam's markets. Vietnam has also agreed that goods would be hit with a 40% tariff rate if they originated in another country and were transferred to Vietnam for final shipment to the United States. The agreement was unveiled less than a week before a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is set to expire. I'm Mark Mayfield.
The Pentagon is saying U.S. strikes have knocked Iran's nuclear program back closer to 2 years.
We believe, and certainly all of the intelligence that we've seen have led us to believe that those facilities especially have been completely obliterated.
That's Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell, who gave the assessment yesterday. Last weekend, the International Atomic Energy Agency saying Iran could be enriching uranium in a matter of months, but the U.S. military has said 3 key nuclear sites were significantly damaged by more than a dozen bunker buster bombs and Tomahawk missiles. Sarah Lee Kessler tells us New York City Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch says they are ready for any possible problems or threats ahead of the Macy's 4th of July fireworks show.
Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch says there are no known or credible threats to this year's celebration. Still,
the NYPD and our federal partners are closely monitoring the threat from lone wolf actors who are motivated by world events.
New York City's top cop says drone detection teams will be in place for the fireworks show, as well as other robust counterterrorism measures.
Explosive detection canines, heavy weapons teams, harbor units conducting security inspections,
plus thousands of uniformed police officers at viewing locations across the city. I'm Sarah Lee Kessler.
Sean Diddy Combs is being ordered to remain behind bars until sentencing after being found guilty of transporting people for prostitution. He was found not guilty, though, of the most serious charge against him, including racketeering and sex trafficking. He is expected to be sentenced on October 3rd. The judge ordering all sides to return to court on that date, but noted that could change if Combs' team argues to meet earlier than the proposed date. The FAA investigating after a wing flap broke off a Delta flight on its way to Raleigh, North Carolina. The flap discovered around 8:30 yesterday morning in the driveway of a Raleigh home. Delta confirming the flap came from flight number 3247, a Boeing 737 flying in from Atlanta. The flight landed safely, and there are no reports of injuries or property damage. Laura Westbrook tells us there's a search that continues for survivors after a ferry sank off the coast of the popular tourist island of Bali in Indonesia.
The boat was carrying 53 passengers and 12 crew members when it sank at 20 past 11 local time on Wednesday. It was on its way to Bali from Indonesia's main island of Java. A rescue team, inflatable rescue boats and a bigger vessel are being used in the search efforts. 4 of the known survivors reportedly saved themselves by using the ferry's lifeboat and were found in the water in the early hours of Thursday morning. The ferry operator told local media that the vessel had reported engine trouble shortly before it sank on a route that is often used by locals going between the islands of Java and Bali. Laura Westbrook, Hong Kong.
The Disney Dream was in international waters Sunday when a little girl fell from the 4th deck between the Bahamas and Florida. Broward Sheriff's Office spokesperson Veda Coleman Wright says investigators are now reviewing videos as well as interviewing Disney personnel along with the girl and her father about what happened. And she also says there are some erroneous rumors out there on social media.
One of the things that is upsetting to the family is some of the erroneous reports that you've seen on social media saying that the father was holding his daughter when she fell overboard, and that is not true.
She also says this appears to be a freak accident and not suspicious. Dr. Phil's television network, Merritt Street Media, is filing for bankruptcy. In addition to the Chapter 11 declaration, it's suing Christian TV companies Trinity Broadcasting and TCT Ministries for allegedly hurting its business and backing out of their obligations. The suit claims Trinity failed to provide agreed-upon national distribution and is seeking damages plus the cost of legal fees. Matt Madison tells us there are new brain implants that are being prepared for commercial use.
Several firms are now set to take brain-computer interface from the experimental stage to commercial usage following more than 20 years of research. The technology decodes brain signals that control speech and movement, and early products will allow users to control a computer cursor or generate artificial speech. Tech billionaire Elon Musk's Neuralink is one of the most discussed devices in the BCI field, but the first product to reach the market could possibly come from competitors BlackRock and Neurotech. I'm Matt Mattinson.
So what's the weather going to be like this weekend? Well, there's a cold front expected to spark storms in the eastern half of the U.S. Well, and it's going to cause some headaches for holiday travelers.
It's a familiar theme for those taking flight. Record demands, meeting the wrath of Mother Nature. The TSA posting that 6 of the top 10 travel days all time have taken place in 2025. That includes 2 in the last week, topped by more than 3 million people on June 22nd.
Sam Brock reporting that the Mid-Atlantic region has been hit with thunderstorms as well as heavy rains that have led to flooding in Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And yesterday, storm conditions were seen along the coast of the Carolinas all the way down to Georgia. National Hurricane Center watching an area off the southeast coast that may cause tropical downpours in Florida. On the 4th, storm conditions are forecast to remain in the southeast, while the Northeast and Midwest will have mostly favorable conditions for the holiday. And the 4th of July travel period now in full swing. AAA is predicting over 72 million of us will venture out at least 50 miles from home over the holiday weekend that began on June 28th and goes through July 6th. That's up 1.3 million road travelers compared to 2024. That's an additional 1.3 million. We'll be right back. More on, of course, the holiday. But first, we're talking about the saint for today, St. Thomas the Apostle. Pray for us. That's coming up. "15 minutes past the hour. It's the second hour of Catholic Connection on Thursday, July 3rd on EWTN Radio Extra. We appreciate your listenership, and I'm sure you'll appreciate all that we try to do to keep you informed, updated about our faith, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And I said earlier, if you're listening in the first hour, I just love these emails that EWTN Mission Advancement puts out. I find them so helpful on the feast days because they summarize everything, and they have this beautiful page that they put together. It has all kinds of questions and background. Who is the saint? Where was he or she from? What does this mean? What do we know about them? And it just makes it very easy. I mean, there's tons of research out there on the saints. We have over 10,000 saints. So you could study them for a lifetime and not even begin to cover them all or exhaust all of the beautiful information. But if you sign up for the EWTN newsletter, you'll get this e-blast. So it's really, really great. And again, this one comes from EWTN Mission Advancement. It says, "Dear Teresa," they're so personal. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not be faithless, but believing." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." And that's from the gospel for today, of course, from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 20. And Mission Advancement tells us, today the church celebrates a feast of St. Thomas the Apostle. Little is recorded about him. Nevertheless, thanks to the Gospel of John, his personality is clearer to us than that of some of the other 12 apostles. He is upheld as an example of faith in our Lord, despite his seeking of certainty and the doubts that he had. St. Thomas initially doubted Christ's resurrection because he had not yet seen the risen Lord. And when our Lord appeared again to his apostle, St. Thomas was present. Our Lord then invited St. Thomas to place his finger and hand in his wound and believe. St. Thomas answered, "My Lord and my God." This prayerful expression is one that Christians can use both in moments of doubt and to silently express their faith, such as at the consecration of the bread and wine when Christ becomes present. That is a beautiful idea and suggestion. My Lord and my God. And I find myself saying that a lot at Mass, but yes, also other times when I'm looking out over creation, or for example, when I see something beautiful here in Italy or elsewhere. My Lord and my God. Or even yesterday, I was talking about sunflowers. Sunflowers are all over right now in Italy, especially where we live part of the year in Umbria, and then, of course, north of us in Tuscany. Even Piedmonte has a fair share of sunflowers, but mostly they're found in this area in the central regions. And I told Dominic before we go back to the United States, I thought we were going to have to go on a sunflower hunting mission this weekend. God willing, we're going to be traveling back to the States next weekend, a week from Saturday. And we decided to stay longer this year because last year we missed the sunflowers. And I was really, really disappointed that we didn't have time to stay to see them. But they are just all over the place, as I mentioned. And I was doing some research on sunflowers and how they follow the sun, and that it's in their internal clock that they're always following the sun. And I thought, okay, how do you not believe in God? How does this happen? And you find yourself and you see this kind of beauty. My Lord and my God. The summary from our friends at Mission Advancement goes on to say, even amid doubt, God can help us grow in faith. Pope Francis said, starting with St. Thomas's disbelief, the Lord led him to profess not only his belief in the resurrection, but above all, his belief in the divinity of the Lord. Despite his early skepticism, St. Thomas courageously proclaimed the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout his life and was martyred for the faith. They go on to tell us, we encourage you to read our special page dedicated to the Feast of St. Thomas, and they answer such questions as, what is St. Thomas the Apostle most known for? Did St. Thomas bring Christianity to India? Did St. Thomas witness the Assumption of Mary into heaven? Is it a sin to doubt? How did St. Thomas die? And where is he buried? Okay? So these are some great questions that they lay out for us and that they answer. And again, it is really beautiful to be able just to summarize this and to actually see the answers to the question. So let's check out where St. Thomas, trying to find this question, here it is, where he was buried. Okay? It is believed that St. Thomas was martyred with the spear in India. A historical tradition holds that following his death, some of his relatives were taken to Edessa, located today in southeastern Turkey, while the rest were kept in India. These latter can still be found in St. Thomas Cathedral Basilica in India, but it is believed the relics that were once held in Edessa were later taken to the Basilica of St. Thomas the Apostle in Ortona, Italy. And that is where Deacon Dom and I went last year to check out this beautiful, beautiful church, the Cathedral of San Tommaso the Apostle in the city of Ortona along the Adriatic. It's beautiful. You can look it up online. The Cathedral of San Tommaso in Ortona is dedicated to St. Thomas the Apostle. The relics of the saint are kept inside the church, which was originally erected on the ruins of pagan places of worship and then rebuilt after the Second World War. It really is quite beautiful, and we actually were able to go see the tomb. There was a mass taking place. It was a Sunday, and we had gone to church earlier. We were in the region of Abruzzo visiting some of Dominic's relatives. He still has family there. And we decided to just travel a bit, and we were going along the coast, and we were really determined to find this church. And so we did find it, and we went in during Mass and sat down respectfully and, of course, prayed. And afterward, they opened up the tomb, which is below the altar, and they allowed people to go down for veneration. If you are traveling, let's say, to Lanciano or down to maybe see San Giovanni Rotondo for Padre Pio, the Cathedral of St. Thomas the Apostle in lovely Ortona, Italy, will be a great place to visit. It's quite lovely. And I'm telling you, to be able to be there and pray at his tomb and his relics. And what's neat about the way they have it set up is they have a map of his travels. They kind of track where he went, of course, after the resurrection and after that scene that we see in the gospel for today. So it's absolutely fabulous. If you are looking to pray and to venerate St. Thomas, you can find his relics, which are now kept, as I just read, in the Cathedral of St. Thomas in Ortona, Italy, in Abruzzo. So let's read a little bit more about St. Thomas. The question that we have in the summary from our friends at EWTN Mission Advancement: did St. Thomas bring Christianity to India? Several non-biblical traditions of uncertain variety do suggest the fact that St. Thomas evangelized parts of India in the middle of the 1st century. Taken together, they suggest at least a common historical opinion. However, the strongest evidence is that of the so-called St. Thomas Christian believers of India themselves, whose own traditions hold St. Thomas as their apostolic source and no other. Did St. Thomas witness the Assumption of Mary into heaven? There are conflicting stories on the exact events surrounding the Assumption of our Blessed Mother and who was present at the events leading to it. In his apostolic constitution defining the dogma of the Assumption, Pope Pius XII teaches the universal tradition of East and West that Our Lady fell asleep, her dormition, in the Lord, and was laid in a tomb, and some days later was assumed in the presence of all the apostles. Among the traditions connected to this one is that holds that St. Thomas was absent at her death, but was miraculously transported to her tomb after her burial, where he did witness our Blessed Mother's Assumption into heaven. So it's just a beautiful way to get to know the saints by signing up for the e-blast from Mission Advancement. And speaking of the saints, Mission Advancement proudly released my series on the saints, Saints in Italy, based on my book, my EWTN book, Italy's Shrines and Wonders, which has been out for a few months now. And it's also free. They have a number of these beautiful, beautiful programs that they're releasing for free, which really are studies. And you can do it with a group, you can do it alone. We have reflection questions, an online study guide, and all you need to do is to go to EWTN.com/Saints in Italy. St. Thomas the Apostle and all the saints pray for us. We'll be right back. Well, I am just tickled pink. Actually, red's my favorite color, but I'm tickled pink as my dear friend and longtime fellow broadcaster Chuck Gaidica from the Motor City is joining us this morning, not just for one, but for two segments. So I'm sure you're familiar with Chuck because he is well known throughout the Midwest for his great work at the NBC affiliate, also the CBS affiliate in Detroit and elsewhere, doing a lot of reporting as well for NBC News. He is a revert to the Catholic faith, most importantly, and a husband and a grandfather, a father. And he also is now a wellness coach, and he actually had his testimony on the journey home not too long ago, so you want to check that out and look it up in the archives. But today what we thought we would talk about, and I'm so excited about this because I think it's all something in which we're interested, is how to have balance when we come to these holidays. Now, the 4th of July is a huge holiday, obviously for America, for very good reasons, as you heard Father Mitch say earlier. And there's always a lot of temptation around us to do a little bit too much, maybe have too much to do in terms of too many activities, but also maybe to indulge a little bit too much. And the church always talks about balance. And that's why I was glad to have Chuck on. My friend, how are you? Good to talk to you again.
Hang on, you're interrupting my relaxation. I got to put my feet back down. Oh, holy cow. Hello.
Hello, Chow. We are great, thanks be to God. So let's
Good.
talk a little bit about the importance of balance when we come into holidays like this one. This is a big one for the U.S. of A.
Well, it really is, and it's it has to do with obviously honoring our independence, so we can't lose sight of that, and it turns into an opportunity to reconnect with family, whether it's, in a little outdoor barbecue, a parade, things that, the rituals are important in life, right? Going to a parade, It seems like, I don't know, should we go to a parade this year and meet our kids or grandkids and old-fashioned fire trucks and American flags? And yet, we're at a time in America where, those things are back post-COVID. Thank God that we're able to gather, that we're able to do those things. So that alone is important. But I think what's also critical is we consider this idea, you started to talk about it, that we unplug. We just, there's a great quote. Anne Lamott is an author, and I remember this quote. She says, and I'll paraphrase, something like, almost everything will work again if you unplug it, even for a few minutes, including us. And it's like a vacuum cleaner, right? People think, well, I'm running and gunning all week. If I unplug, man, somehow I'll lose everything and I won't remember how to do it again on Monday. No. It's kind of like your computer or a vacuum. You can unplug it. Guess what? If you plug it back in on Monday, it'll work again, And I always think of that quote because it's so appropriate for times like these.
Why don't you think still so many of us don't do that, even do it for a little while? What do you think?
I think it's because some of us are driven, entrepreneurial. There's that, right? How you're wired by God. So some of that's a charism. You're a successful business person, and in your own realm, you're doing. And then when it comes to not doing, it seems strange. And I'll tell you what, this is, you and I haven't talked about this, but a week ago, I put myself into a 5.5-day, basically a work week long class on Catholic iconography painting. I painted the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I'll send you a picture. I painted the Sacred Heart of Jesus with the help of an instructor, a great priest from New Jersey, and he came into the Detroit area. Now, until you and I connected about this call today, I thought, well, unplugging means go put my feet up, as I was joking at the top of our call, totally unplug, get everything out of my brain. And then I thought, no, wait a minute. I unplugged from my normal life 9 to 4, Monday through Friday, and the latter 3 hours in a Sunday. And I would still consider that unplugging because I was concentrating completely on something that I've never done, wanted to learn, and I was going off into a different place as a creator in my own little realm, as an artist. I don't consider myself that, but, and it was fantastic, as different as it was and challenging as it was. And so that alone is unplugging, but I never really gave it as much thought until, the opportunity to talk to you today about it.
Well, it's a beautiful connection because what you were doing is unplugging and doing something very different than you're used to in terms of this is a new activity, but it's focused on God because you're really trying to be open. Because I know our mutual friend Kathy Crombie, who's a great artist and has done so many icons, she says, I'm not the painter, God is. I just have to, and she always tells me the process where you have to pray about it, and then God gives you the image.
Exactly.
And so this is relaxing. It's just a different type of relaxation.
Yeah, you're right. And I know, you look at many different cultures, whether it's siesta time or a couple hours, for lunch break in Italy, the resting, the idea of riposo, right? The idea of resting. It's critically important for our health, for our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health. And, there are these moments in our calendar. So we live in a world where, God is above all, but we live in this chronos time, where we're always looking at watches and phones and calendars and bookings. Well, you're a good example. You're here, you're there, you're everywhere. Just blink and Teresa's on an airplane. And, it's true. But that's the way we're living. But yet to find those moments, even for you maybe, in an airport or on the plane, where you're able to just unplug for a minute and not do, man, that's important stuff for our health.
Well, I was telling my wonderful executive producer, Richard, from EWTN, I sent him a picture. I'll send it to you as well, of our little village here in Umbria, and we're still here for another week. And last night, the sunset, Chuck, was just crazy. And we decided when we moved here, and we fought it, and then we said no, then we said yes, and we decided against getting a television. So even though we have obviously the internet and we have cable access and a phone and everything, I said to Dominic, I said, I don't want to get a TV because, you and I, we grew up in the news, and last year was the election year, and I'm a news junkie already. And I said, no, we don't need it. We have the internet. It works really well. Sure. Let's just do that, and we want to find out what's going on in the world. But you know what we do for our entertainment, and this ties into what we're talking about today, and this is what I was telling Richard, is that we use our balcony as our entertainment, and we sit there in the morning and do our prayers, and then after the show we go out, we sit on the balcony and have our cena or our dinner, and then we watch the skies, and we watch the birds, and we watch the activity, and we get a kick out of the birds because they're all over the place, and they do all these different flying formations, and we just sit and look at God's creation, and it's the best entertainment ever, and it's so relaxing. So simple, but so relaxing.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, and I'll give you this tip, which is a bit unrelated, but not so much now that you've said this. I have yet to download it. I was going to search it today. There's an app for your phone. I think it's from Cornell University. It's a bird identifying app. You literally sit there, you push the button, and it listens to the bird sounds, and it tells you immediately what kind of bird it is. And I thought, well, now, to me, as a lifelong learner, and that's one of my asterisks behind my name, right? I thought, I love that. I love what you just said, but there are often times where Susan and I are outside, and she'll say, what kind is that? Well, it's not a robin. I don't know. And I heard of this app. So anyway, try it out. Maybe it's a good thing for you and Dom.
But it's really a great suggestion to do something like that, because it's getting your mind off of the busy activities and whatnot and focusing on nature, focusing on God's creation. We're chatting with my friend Chuck Gaidica, longtime media personality, meteorologist for the NBC affiliate and also the CBS affiliates in Detroit, and did a lot of work for NBC News while he was working in the Motor City. We've known each other for years. He's a revert to the faith, and he also is a health and wellness coach. And we're calling these segments for today, as we move into the holiday weekend, suggestions for a healthy and holy holiday weekend. And we're going to talk about the connection between, when we come back, religious involvement and health span. And this is so important, Chuck. I just taped an interview with Father Calloway about the rosary. There was a new study that came out, go figure, about the rosary and how healthy it is for you psychologically and spiritually. More with my friend Chuck Gaidica. Check out his beautiful website, chuckgaidica.com, GAIDICA.com. He's a great speaker and presenter, and also can do retreats for you as well. We'll be right back. Wishing you a beautiful 4th of July weekend, but as Pope Benedict would say, you have to take God with you on vacation and never take a vacation from God. And my friend Chuck Gaidica, who is now a health and wellness coach, you can find his great work and all about his media background at chuckgaidica.com, knows a lot about the positive association between religious involvement and health span. And Chuck, we were talking before the break about this new study that came out regarding, it's kind of like, okay, why is this a shock to some people? That the rosary is very, very efficacious in terms of your spirituality and your peace, which is exactly what you're talking about, that there is an association between our faith and our health span.
That's a great study, and there are so many other studies that support and undergird what we're talking about. And, let's define what we mean first. We've all grown up in a world where we talk about lifespan, right? Someone dies, sadly, in your life. Oh, my Uncle Freddie, he passed away at age 39, my favorite uncle. And, you hear at a funeral, only the good die young. Why do the good have to die so young? And then some people, like my dad, got to age 85, an average, I would gather, in that range of an average lifespan for an American male. And you think, okay, God's got a plan. I understand that part, but what is it? We talk about the years of life, and sometimes we forget to talk about health span. You mentioned this word. But what we're all aching for in our world today, whether we know it overtly or not, we want our health span, how healthy we are, to as close as we can get it, equal our lifespan. And I think that's a critical change in the way people are beginning to think, not just older people, but everybody. We want to age vibrantly, and we don't want to have 10, 15 really crummy years at the end of our life. Even if we make it to 85, you don't want to start being ill at 70. And so I think that's a really big change for us. And there are so many studies that connect this notion of spirituality, as you mentioned it, to the influence of health span and longevity, especially for older adults. And in a world where, I think it was 2 days ago, I heard a story on the Business Channel about mental health jobs are one of the fastest growing healthcare jobs in America, still post-COVID. And so I went on LinkedIn and I typed in mental health jobs, and boom, it just populates just in Southeast Michigan. I'm not looking for one. I just thought I'd see how many there are. All kinds of things. And I thought, the idea that the studies have shown improved mental health, religious and spiritual practices are linked directly to mental health outcomes that are positive, lower rates of depression, anxiety, lower rates of stress. And we're talking about studies that have come out from Harvard and places that would be secular institutions are pointing to this notion, maybe not in particular to the rosary like that study that you cite, but this notion that our increased longevity and reduced mortality risk is literally associated to us reducing stress and seeing what's going on in our lives and contemplating it a bit more, even attending religious services, community. This is something that's very important to our health.
Which brings us to what we can do this 4th of July weekend. I always love going to Mass on the 4th of July holiday. I love the music. I love being there. It always gets me choked up when they play so many patriotic hymns at the end, especially the Christian ones. What would you suggest, because we're talking about healthy and holy holiday habits for the weekend, any ideas on what we can do to make it a healthier holiday from the perspective you just mentioned, Chuck?
Well, you said one thing that's so important, because oftentimes we just think of this as a big 3-day holiday, but attending a Mass Friday morning, tomorrow morning, whatever it is, the notion of really considering in your life, how do you create stronger social support all year long and even in a holiday situation? So the upside of attending Mass, obviously, hearing those songs, but promoting a healthy behavior of finding reasons to involve yourself in community and activities that give you a feeling like, whether it's shaking hands, high-fiving, whether you're singing, praying, that you're doing things that bring you these altruistic activities that can lead to volunteering and things that are bigger than yourself. So there are lots of opportunities for that. Maybe you're serving or walking in a parade. You're attending a Mass. There are so many ways to weave this into the nature of our lives, even on a holiday weekend, that promotes healthy behaviors. And I think once we start, if you don't start something, you can't begin it. So just take a little one foot in front of the other. Maybe you make a change this weekend and you do something different. That's great.
Yeah, and I think, too, going to Mass, it does so much for us. You talk about community. This is something that the previous Surgeon General, and you and I discussed this as well on Catholic Connection, when that report came out about this epidemic of loneliness. And one of the reasons is we turned in on ourselves. Of course, COVID had a lot to do with that. And even though we're, over 5 years out, the effect, I'm afraid, in some ways is still lasting.
Well, it is, and I think the other thing, this idea of where we started with this quote about unplugging, these are perfect opportunities in our lives to unplug. And maybe it is as simple as walking your neighborhood and praying, listening to the birds, going off into a nature hike, just attending a parade on a fold-out chair, and just catch your breath and soak it in and understand that you are starting to support coping mechanisms. You're getting stronger social support because you're waving at children you don't even know, or the fire engine, sounds the siren. You're hearkening back to your childhood yourself about all those great 4th of Julys, in my case with my cousin, my aunt and uncle in the suburbs of Chicago. So you're improving your mental health without overtly taking steps to improve anything, You're just holistically getting healthier. And I think that's a great way to look at getting better in life in general.
What are we seeing, and in your research as a health and wellness coach, what are you seeing in addition to what we just discussed, Chuck, the connection between religious involvement and our health?
Well, we have an epidemic of loneliness. You mentioned that, and this is across demographics. It's amazing that in a world of hyper connectivity, with all the social media, that we are disconnected. Thousands of Facebook friends, and if I got a flat tire today, I'm not sure any one of them would come help me. Are they really friends is the point. And so the question then becomes, how how do we continue to have these social mechanisms that allow us to have real friendships? And I think loneliness, you automatically think, I shouldn't say you, sometimes I would automatically think, well, it must be those people that I'm going out as a Eucharistic minister, to a nursing home or something. And I think, oh, yeah, I saw this in my own mom's case when she was in memory care. There were some people there who never, capital N, never got a visitor, even on some of the highest holy days. And so that's an automatic process for me because I've got a bias to it. I kind of witnessed it, not from my mom, but for people around her. Yeah. And I think, we always think, well, it's the older generation that's lonely. They've lost a spouse or they don't have as many friends left anymore. No, it's kids that are 25. It's people that are 40. And so this idea of finding community, which you know this and I know this, it's harder for men to do. It just is. We're wired differently. Susan and I go out to a restaurant and she walks out with 3 new best friends out of the ladies' room. It does not happen.
That sounds like me and Dominic. How do you know that? I don't know her. She just started talking to me.
Exactly. I don't walk out with 3 guys going, "Hey, I can't wait to see you on Monday." And it's just not a thing. So we guys, and this is a bias of mine. I'm a guy. We've got to work a little harder at finding community. For me, a great way is at our parish. We're playing pickleball now on Wednesday night. Mm-hmm. Susan and I both go, but for me, it's a great way to connect with other men and women. It happens to be at our parish, but what a great thing to do. And it's exercise, and it takes my mind off the world. So these are not hard things to accomplish, but they do require beginning them,
Really great advice. Talking with my friend Chuck Gaidica, his website, chuckgaidica.com. The last name is spelled Gaidica. His email, if you'd like to reach out to have him at a speaking event or maybe do a retreat, chuck@chuckgaidica.com. Very easy to find online. Extensive media background. We've known each other for years, worked side by side in the secular media. Chuck, Vanessa, and I were all working together in Detroit media. And, talking about community, we live in this little village, and I've told you about it, in central Italy. And Dominic and I are trying to learn Italian. We're taking a course online. It's very slow. It's moving very slowly, piano, piano, piano. But that doesn't stop us from going to the events here. Dominic is serving in our little church up the street. He says 2 lines in Italian, the sign of peace and dismissal. And then whenever they have an event, we always go. And so we have our neighbors 2 doors down who have been a big help to us who do speak both English and Italian. And so they usually come with us. But even if they don't, we end up going. They have these little events where they celebrate, pork week or this new pasta or, wine, the new wines that come out. And a couple of weeks ago, you'll appreciate this, they had just a little gathering to kind of kick off the summer season. And outside of our church, there's a picnic area. And so they made all the food, the pasta, the prosciutto, everything. And they had a contest where they hung a giant leg of prosciutto, only in Italy, from this wire over the parking lot. And the guys had to guess how high was the prosciutto, how many feet or how many meters up was the prosciutto. And this was the biggest deal. Everybody was watching, and then we sat down and ate dinner. But I'm thinking, this is community. They know us now because we make an effort, and we feel like we're part of the town, even though we communicate through Google Translate and a few phrases that Dominic and I managed to do. But the community that we've built, they're always asking us, when are you coming back? What's your schedule? And when we had a big festival in the town, a religious festival, several women went up to Dom. He's the star here. Diacono Domenico, asking him if he was going to help out with the festival. But Chuck, it didn't take much. We just put ourselves out there. That was it.
Well, and isn't that in a microcosm what parish life can be for all of us? If we just, again, you've got to start something to begin it. And so just attending Mass and making it a more frequent thing. So now you start to know people. They know you. Even the usher knows you, and you do a fist bump when they come by. It's just this community, and it's the equal sign community, equal sign lifespan and longevity, and it's and health. It's just the research just supports it 110%.
Are you finding yourself doing more events, speaking events based on this subject matter, because it's so key for what's going on right now in our world?
I'm doing a lot. I'm living it, as we've discussed privately and on air. This idea of a second half of life. The math doesn't work out for me, so it's not necessarily that someone is retired, but it's a unique space, not just for Catholics, but for America in general. If you look at 50 plus in America, age 50 plus, it's 110 million of us. So we're all aging, but I think post-COVID, it's now 30, 40, 50-year-olds. So I'm speaking in that space a lot, and I'm using the health and wellness aspects of why we need to age well and look to this idea. And it kind of takes you back in a secular way to Simon Sinek. You know, he asks that question in a different context. What's your why? Why do you want to live to 90? Why do you want to be healthy to 90? Why? And so for me, it has everything to do with being vibrant. I look at pictures of friends, events, weddings, my children, grandchildren now, my wife. That's my why. Being able to connect with you when you're in town and even on air, those are friendships that will last forever. That's one of my whys. So why do you want to be healthy? It's not just because. It's because you can look around and ask yourself that important question while you're relaxing a bit this weekend. What is my why? Why do I want to live a long life? And if you get that answer, in a business sense, use some reverse engineering and then ask yourself, well, how do I get there? How do I change a couple little things to be able to answer that big question? What's your why?
Yeah, that is a great way to wrap up the discussion. What is your why? And also, think about this weekend, and I would wrap up with this, Chuck, and I'll let you have the last word. That if you, speaking of why, if you are going into this holiday weekend thinking, oh, this is going to be great, I have tomorrow off, I have 2 more days off, I'm going to get all this stuff done at the house, I'm going to clean out the garage, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get the kids, because you and I both know, being media people, that they've already got the back to school items, and probably even back home they probably have Halloween, knowing
Halloween is
our
out.
culture.
I just saw it.
Yeah. Well, oops, we're out of time. That means you have to come back on. My friend, you have a beautiful 4th of July weekend with Susan. Tell her I said hello, love you, and we will see you, God willing, when we get home. My friend Chuck Gaidica, check out his really cool website, chuckgaidica.com. We'll be right back. Thanks so much for joining us on a Thursday, and hope you take some of Chuck's very sage advice in terms of relaxing. Be still and know that He is God. Never a bad thing. And start out with Mass tomorrow. What a great way. Every day to start out, of course, or you can just listen to it right here on EWTN, or maybe both. How's that? Pray the Rosary. And speaking of the Rosary, we are going to be talking to tomorrow on our show, a special edition of Catholic Connection. We are off for the holiday, but we prepared a very special program for you. Father Don Calloway is going to be joining us, along with Doug Keck. Doug will be talking about our upcoming programming next week for July. And Father Don Calloway will be talking to us about the Rosary and his response to the study that we discussed with Chuck on how efficacious the Rosary is and why. And he has some suggestions. Maybe you're not a Rosary prayer right now, but how to get started. So I look forward to that. And then we will have Fact Check Friday. We're going to take a look at the media and how they covered this story that we discussed in the first hour with the Susan B. Anthony list, the story on the Maryland schools and how they lost big time at the Supreme Court when they tried to pull a fast one on the parents, thinking the parents wouldn't say anything. And they said at first, oh, we'll tell you all about it when we are bringing these books, this LGBTQ transgender agenda, to your 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. And then we'll give you the chance to opt out. All of a sudden that changed. And so the parents took it to the Supreme Court. A lot to discuss. Hope you can join us on a Friday. Have a great Thursday. Happy 4th of July, and God bless America.